Welcome back to Follow the Compass North. Today we have a pretty exciting topic to talk about. That's water purification and water purification myths. We'll start off by discussing what type of threats we're dealing with in our water sources, and then we'll continue with what kind of treatments we can use in order to knock these out of our water, or at least make it so that they cannot latch on or reproduce and pretty much become inert. So our first threat that we're going to talk about today is viruses. Viruses can be down to 25 nanometers in size. Now a nanometer is 1/1000th of a micron or micrometer, which is 1/1000th of a millimeter. So you can see a millimeter with the naked eye, but when you're talking about 1/1000th of a millimeter, you're not going to be able to see it. That's more of our microscopic level of bacteria and protozoa. 1/1000th the size of that is going to be your viruses. So viruses are the smallest ones that we have to deal with, and our representative item today is hepatitis down here, and it's too small to even see some detail on there. Our next are bacteria. Bacteria are a lot larger than viruses. They have a full single cell, which means that they're going to have multiple organelles inside. They're going to have a cell wall. They're going to have a rough cell shape, depending on what type of bacteria it is. Today, our representative item for bacteria is going to be cholera. Our cholera here is 1 micron by 2 microns, but other bacteria can be much, much longer, up to the 10 micron in length. Our final threat here is protozoa. Protozoa is a little bit larger than bacteria, still a single-celled organism, but a little more complex. These tend to have mechanical capabilities of latching on. They have complex life cycles. They don't just reproduce into the same exact bacteria over and over again. They can have a cyst stage. They can be then activated by stomach acids and then latch onto the intestinal wall. These little buggers are your Giardia or your Cryptosporidium. Now, you're not always going to see all three of these in all water sources. There's a lot of water sources on the planet that are fairly safe to drink. However, for the purposes of this video and my instruction, I'm going to say that I treat all water, no matter which situation I'm in or where I'm at, no matter how clean it is, which elevation I'm at, or how much faith I have in the local environment. This is because while I was doing some work in Norway, I was at the 7,000, 8,000 foot mark, and a local there said, "Oh, just grab water right out of the creek, drink it up. There's nothing up at this elevation that's going to cause you any harm. We're above the agricultural zones, we're above areas where we had freelance animals, we had above the area where they used fertilizer, other chemicals in the soil, and it was fairly good, clean water." When I was filling my Nalgene, I looked over, and this nice crystal clear water, cold, refreshing looking, and just 10 feet away from me upstream was a dead animal floating against this log that had kind of crashed off to the side. And as I was filling the water, I was like, I'm not entirely sure this water's still safe to drink. So I went ahead and chemically purified it anyways. This just goes to show that despite the location I was in, despite the cleanliness of that water, or of the fact that it was a spring-fed, high-altitude water in Norway, which has low pollution, it was still a threat to my health, so I treated it anyways. So for the purpose of this lesson, we're going to assume that we're treating all of our waters from all sources everywhere in the world. Now, the lower in elevation you go, the closer you are to agricultural zones, to free-range animals, the more you're going to see bacteria, and the more you're going to see protozoa, the more wildlife there is, the more these get transferred around as you get deeper and deeper into that water cycle. Viruses, however, are a little bit more difficult to find in the wild. Viruses require another life form to attach onto, to use its hard protein shell and clamp onto another life form and inject it with its DNA and hijack it. So viruses aren't just floating out in the water, they can't survive on their own. So usually you see this with fecal matter or any other type of dead flesh or anything that could be in the water, like that animal that I saw. You could have seen viruses off of that. But these guys, while they're tiny and hard to filter, hard to treat are a little less likely to be seen. The big factors that we need to really worry about here are primarily our protozoa. If you're into wilderness survival, if you do any hiking, you've probably heard of Giardia. You probably know someone who has had Giardia or has mentioned Cryptosporidium or Cryptosporidia. These are all types of single-celled protozoa that can cause issues for you. Now, we also need to recognize that protozoa like this have a cyst stage, and I've drawn it out here. This cyst stage has a thicker, harder shell, which makes it a little bit harder to kill off and to make it inert than our basic bacteria or other single cells that we see here. I've listed these in order of what I saw as a threat, which virus being the smallest, bacteria being more of a threat, and protozoa being our biggest. And I've similarly listed our treatments in what I think is the least effective to the most effective. Now, filtration is not an ineffective way of cleaning your water. I'm not saying that. There are methods of filtration that are ineffective. The 3-tiered water system, or using your shirt or using a piece of nylon to filter water out. I used to work with an individual who would take a nylon sheet. He had a couple of handfuls of charcoal in there, and he'd filter his water through that and say, that's all you need. Now his water went in kind of nasty looking, and then when it came back out, when it went through the charcoal and the nylon, it looked cleaner, it tasted better. It was very palatable water, but it was not purified water. Viruses, bacteria, and protozoa can make it through that improvised filtration. Using a shirt, using nylon, using charcoal will make your water more palatable, but will not make it safer. Sure, it might catch a couple of these, but not enough to make a real difference. However, filtration systems that do work really well are your commercial, like your MSR or Katadyn filtration systems, the pump ones that you use that you can pump from pretty much any source and filter out your bacteria and protozoa. Now, I didn't mention viruses in there because those are using a porcelain, ceramic, foam type filter. They're very lightweight, they're hard to the touch, they feel like a rock that you'd put in your aquarium or something like that. And when you pump through that, it's got a 0.1 micron filtration capability, which will definitely take out your protozoa. This is 30 times too big. It'll definitely take out your bacteria. This is 10 times larger than that 0.1 micron because we're down to 1 micron here. But viruses are several orders of magnitude smaller than that filtration system. Now, we've mentioned viruses are not a very likely threat out there, but filters, and those commercial filters even, will have a hard time pulling viruses out of water. For that, you're going to need a reverse osmosis filtration system, or a filtration system with a second or third layer of defense. So it's important that if you do have a filter, read up on the specs, look at the size that it can actually filter down to. Make sure it's using one of those porcelain foam filters so that it can take these two out, which are your big players. But realize it may not do viruses. Chemicals are next best. We have iodine, we have sweet water, we have chlorine, and these do work fairly effectively. They come along with a change in taste. Personally, I use iodine almost exclusively for 4 years. It got to the point where water that didn't have iodine in it tasted a little funny to me. Now, if you have a shellfish poisoning, that is based on the iodine in that shellfish, so definitely do not use iodine purification out in the woods if you have a shellfish allergy or issues with that. However, I used it pretty exclusively for 4 or 5 years and had no issues. Chlorine is a great replacement if you do have a shellfish allergy. We do use chlorine out in the field quite a bit. It is effective, but if you're trying to kill your viruses or render them inert, you need to have it in your water for about 20 minutes for both iodine and chlorine. Now, the colder your water is, the slower it's moving. If you're using a pill form versus a liquid form, that can all extend the amount of time that it takes to knock these out. So it's important to read your instructions on whatever one you're using and follow them precisely. The manufacturer has taken the time to figure that all out for you. follow those instructions. And you're thinking, hey, why didn't we just start with that? Follow instructions and you're good. Well, we're trying to dig down a little bit deeper into it and understand a little bit better. So if you're using your chemical means, definitely wait about 20 minutes after use. That's my minimum, 15-20 minutes before I'm going to drink it, just to make sure that the chlorine had a chance to actually get past the hard protein shell and kill the DNA in that virus, to make sure that iodine had the ability to break down and fully mix into that solution and not just sitting at the bottom staining my drinking water and not purifying it at all. Our third option here is UV light, commonly used in the SteriPen industry. And I'm mentioning a couple of brands here: MSR, Katadyn, SteriPen. I'm not affiliated with any of them. They're just very common ones to use. And any other interchangeable high quality brand would work fine here. I'm not endorsing any one of them. I use SteriPen quite a bit. The downside with SteriPen or UV light systems is that if your water is super murky, it dissipates that UV really quickly. So you're only purifying a small area around your light as you stir. So you have to have very clear water for your UV light or your SteriPen to work. So if you don't have clear water, that's where I'm going to use filtration to clear that water up, and then use the UV light in order to make it actually purified, take out these threats. Now you can use filtration for taste with any one of these, but for the UV light it becomes critical to make sure that you're knocking out those threats. Another form of using UV light that is not tied to any brand and frankly free and easy to use if you have a couple days is to fill up clear plastic water bottles. Make sure you remove the label and lay them out in the direct sunlight, no overcast, for about 3 days. I have a suspicion that they're good to go after one solid day of direct light, but currently what we're doing overseas for areas of like Africa or some rural parts of India we've seen, and Thailand, is what they'll do is they'll fill these water bottles up, they'll leave them out in a direct sunlight for 3 days. That natural UV light from the sun actually purifies that, and it's safe to drink. That's a full purification of the bottle, of the fluid inside, whereas if you're using a electronic form like the SteriPen, you may be purifying everything inside, but you could still have some of this on the threads of your container. So make sure whatever one you're using here, you're actually rinsing the threads out on your container with that fresh, clean water before taking a drink and putting that bacteria that's been hanging out in the threads right on your lips, because then that purifying water really does nothing for you. Purified water does nothing for you. Our final option we're going to talk about today, and there are probably a half dozen or more other options out there, but today we're going to stick to the last one here, is boil. Boil is tried and true. Boil is going to take care of all of these if you do it properly. The downside with boiling is that if you're drinking 3 to 4 quarts a day and you're using this for hygiene, sanitation hygiene, you're taking small baths, or you're brushing your teeth or shaving, or you're using up 5 to 6 quarts of water a day very easily, boiling that much water can become very difficult. It's energy intensive, and it requires a large metal canister to boil that in. Now, I've boiled all my water. I've spent a week out in the woods boiling every drop of water that I drank, and it's exhausting. You're thirsty and you're waiting for the water to cool down. By the time you drink that water, you need to be boiling water again. This is very, very labor intensive, which is why it's not commonly used. However, once you have that water boiling, and if you're thinking about what's going on here, the liquid of the water is heating up to the point, vibrating to the point where it expands into a gas, and that steam starts to escape. That's what's happening to the water, but that's also what's happening to the water inside these threats. So the protozoa is expanding and rupturing, the bacteria is expanding and rupturing, the virus is being shaken and cracking and breaking apart. You're physically damaging these through the act of boiling. The reason I get into that is because there are some common myths associated with boiling water at altitude. you'll hear the saying, you boil water for 1 minute at sea level, for 3 minutes at 7,500 feet, or for 5 to 10 minutes at anything over 10,000 feet. That is frankly inaccurate. Yes, there is a temperature difference between, based on the pressure differentiation between sea level and 7,500 feet, 10,000 feet. Yes, the temperature it takes to boil the water does decrease as you increase in elevation. However, the temperature required to kill these, because it's the same exact mechanic, also decreases. So if you have a solid rolling boil for 1 second, if you have a solid rolling boil, it's killing everything and sterilizing everything in that pan. The reason they say to let it boil for a minute is so that you don't miss any part of that water. You don't have an eddy, you don't have the Coriolis effect, not heating up a small portion of the side of the kettle. We don't want you boiling or simmering one side and the other side not being fully sanitized. But if you have a full rolling boil for 1 second, these are all dead, regardless of altitude. So at sea level, rolling boil for 1 second, your water's purified. If you're at 10,000 feet, rolling boil for 1 second, your water's purified. Now, I will tend to boil mine for a minute just to make sure, just to be safe. It's good practice to do so. The 1 second is just an example to show that the mechanic that makes the water turn into steam is the same mechanic that kills these threats. So you're good to go. And that's one of the main myths that I've heard out there. Now, I've been teaching wilderness survival for 14 years, and I've been doing hiking and backpacking for 20 plus years, for the family at a young age all the way up till now. And you'd be surprised by how many people don't understand the basics of water purification. The bottom line is, wherever you're going, you should research, find out what your threats are in that area, and make sure that the technique that you're bringing or planning on using is feasible and also effective with what you're dealing with. So do your research, take care of yourself, because some of these can cause some serious health issues for you and cause some long-term side effects that will make it a little bit less likely for you to get motivated and excited to go out to the woods again. All right, that's all I have for you today on water purification. There's a lot more we can get in on this, but I wanted to start off with the baseline, main 3 threats, 4 different types of treatments that we can use, and just get the conversation started. I'm sure there's going to be questions on this. I'm sure there's going to be people who are going to have disagreements with some of the things I said. With water purification, that's accepted. I understand that it's coming. Put it in the comments down below. We'll discuss. If you get a solid correction on me and find some way that I'm wrong, I'll list it off in the next video and give you credit for it, because we're going to work together here to make sure that everyone's on board. All right, if you liked what you saw here today, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Anything that you do to help support the channel is appreciated. Thank you, and have a good night.